People love to bag on humid DC summers, but I actually love them. And what better way to kick off this summer than with Columbia Heights Day on June 15th? So the rumor is that this idea came about when a bunch of friends were tossing around ideas over beers at Wonderland Ballroom. And shockingly, they actually followed through with it. And now the day is still around 16 years later. So there's going to be a dunk tank, a mechanical bull, a bouncy house, and even a watermelon seed spitting competition. So come out to it. It's at Harriet Tubman Elementary School on June 15th from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And it's going to be fun. Today on CityCast DC, Washington is elated about getting its pandas back, and CityCast CEO David Plotz is here to rain on their parade. On the other hand, there's also a new report ranking Washington as having the best parks in the country, and CityCast park expert Jacob Fenston is actually going to lead that parade. And we are also going to talk through the latest skirmishing over the city's budget, which involves the prospect of tax hikes on homeowners. Today is Friday, May 31st. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Jacob.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, David.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I'm good. So, David, in addition to being the fearless leader of CityCast, you are Washington's leading panda skeptic, which means Wednesday must have been a bittersweet day for you when they announced the return of pandas to the zoo.
What was the sweet part? It was just bitter. It was just a bitter day.
Your expertise is suddenly in demand again.
I did get this cavalcade of texts from friends being like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. you must be really bummed." People saying, "Oh, you'll probably vote for Trump now because Biden has done this." So, yes, I am the only public panda skeptic I know in the whole world, but I wear that black and white fur jacket proudly.
What is your case against pandas?
Well, can we introduce the return of the pandas? So that the National Zoo announced on Wednesday that they're getting 2 pandas back after this panda drought. Bao Li and Qing Bao are coming, a male and a female, and they're going to come from China later this year and occupy a newly renovated panda enclosure. And Mike, am I not right that every year that's basically a newly renovated panda enclosure, they're always like, "Oh, we've newly renovated the panda enclosure"? They are always renovating the panda enclosure.
I think Washington's philanthropic community is very pro-panda. That David Rubenstein's name is on the panda house.
He's got to spend it on something.
They're now going to be soliciting a huge amount of new money. By the way, the first pandas, Sing Sing and Ling Ling, they were a gift, right? A friendly gift from our new friend, China. Ever since, the pandas have been cash on the barrelhead, very expensive rental from our capitalist rival, China. And these ones are going to cost $1 million a year.
Very much like the DC housing market. The prices have gone up tremendously over the years. You cannot get a good panda for less than $1 million a year these days. But look, I grew up in Washington. I arrived in Washington, D.C. with the pandas, essentially. I was a butterball 6-month-old in 1970. The pandas came, I think, in 71. 72. I spent most of my childhood. I feel like my sense memory of my childhood is most of it was spent on field trips to the zoo or trips with my parents to the zoo where it was so hot and so miserable. And
parents always take you to the zoo on the hottest day of the year in DC. That's just one of the rules.
Yeah, and just like waiting to see these pandas, and the pandas sitting in this kind of depressing concrete cage and, mauling their infant or mauling a keeper or, obsessively in one of the pandas' cases, sticking carrots up her private parts. And, all zoos are depressing, But pandas, there's something about the way that pandas are lionized, to use a different zoo metaphor, that really annoys me, because there's no denying they are beautiful animals. Like, they are so cute. They're the definition of cute. And I would never argue against that. But they have this blankness, this stupidity to them, this unwillingness to work for their own survival, this unwillingness to do anything other than just sit and be fed. It reminds you of sort of like some kind of voluptuary empress in the late Roman era who just doesn't bother. Just feed me. I'll sit here. And they have no discernible personality. They don't like each other. They don't like humans. And the way in which people go gaga over them, when there's so many other animals that deserve your attention, that are working harder for your attention, the prairie dogs working so hard, the red pandas, like not which are not pandas themselves, red pandas, just delightful animals, absolutely delightful animals, so fun, so lively, so clever. And I don't blame the pandas themselves. I blame you, CityCast DC listeners.
Jacob, longtime DC media figure. One, are you pro panda? And two, are you to blame?
I probably am to blame. I did my share of spreading Panda-monium this week when I was reporting on the pandas. I mean, I have to say I was a panda skeptic for a long time. When I moved here in 2010. And then a few months later, I think Tai Shan was sent back to China, if I'm recalling correctly, which was the first panda cub that was born in DC. And I remember just like there were these photo spreads in the Washington Post and these like infographics and like drawings of the airplane. And I was like, what is wrong with these people? This is just bonkers. What is going on here? And in the years since, I think I have kind of embraced it. And I think, I think it's fun. I think it's silly. I think there are positive consequences of our obsession with pandas, such as, money being spent on conservation of this interesting species in China. So I've kind of been won over the years, and I have fun with this.
So I actually wrote my political column on this week about sort of your piece of it, the media buzz about it. That, I'm not quite with David on the anti-panda feelings, but I think there's something like weird and undignified about it. That somehow the panda, in very short order after 1972, became like the symbol of DC. There used to be pictures of pandas on like the fare cards for Metro, and all these T-shirts that you didn't have to go to the zoo to buy the T-shirts. You could buy them on the mall. These tourist T-shirts that had said like Washington DC and had a picture of a panda. Like this is not an indigenous mid-Atlantic animal, nor a symbol of our nation or anything like that. And there is something like kind of hickish about the way people get so, woohoo, the pandas are back. This is actually not even the first panda deal of the year. The San Diego Zoo and the San Francisco Zoo have both signed deals with the Chinese Wildlife Conservation Agency to get pandas within the last few months. And somehow those cities like managed to like be chill about it. And yet Washington, which fashions itself this global, cosmopolitan metropolis, is responding like a bunch of hillbillies where like, someone just brought the monorail to Palookaville. What are we doing, people?
This is like the classic Mike Schaefer theme. Your main theme about Washington is, why can't we be cooler? Why can't we just seem cooler about stuff?
Just now be chill about the pandas.
Now I'm going to defend them. You've made me want to defend the pandas.
I mean, so this is my theory of the case, of why we so love the pandas, of all animals to love. It's actually precisely because they have nothing to do with DC, right? Everything else, and most of the teams, except the Commanders, most of the teams have their colors are red, white, and blue. Their names are like nationals and capitals and senators and stuff. There's like bald eagles, friezes all over the place. And the panda, there's just no way you can connect it to any of the like normal Washington iconography, which makes it kind of like a refreshing change of pace. Like, look, it's clumsy and black and white and goofy. And I think probably I suspect that's like the subconscious reason people ignore the ample evidence that David has marshaled for their insufficiency as a zoo exhibit.
I mean, I'm clearly wrong. Like, it's obvious that I'm wrong because people are voting with their feet. The zoo attendance goes up when there are pandas. People buy the panda stuff. People watch those panda cams. So I recognize that I'm the problem, but it is frustrating all the same.
Who got to David? You're like self-criticizing here. All right. Thank you for sharing your panda views. Luckily, you'll have many more opportunities to do so because the deal is for 10 years.
Got to go down to the zoo just a couple blocks away and start heckling. Just get ready.
All right. So, Jacob, if you were to be believed, one upside of the pandas is that it will cause more people to come to Washington and spend more money, perhaps spend an extra night in the hotel so they can get more time with the pandas, buy panda merch, etc. The upside of this is apparently DC needs the money. As CityCast listeners know, the city's in the middle of a tough budget cycle. There's a pretty sizable shortfall. The mayor has proposed a bunch of cuts, including to some social welfare programs, as well as a few tax hikes and things like hotels and a sales tax hike. Now the DC Council is pushed back and voted with only one no vote on a version of the budget that restores a bunch of those cuts, but raises more taxes, including on homeowners, or at least homeowners of really expensive houses. I feel like this is kind of the moment where, here's the issue that comes into focus.
Yeah, I mean, before we leave the pandas, this week, I was at the zoo and I talked to a bunch of people who are there visiting, a lot of tourists. I talked to one family from St. Louis, a large family. They were here. They said they booked their tickets to DC because they wanted to see the pandas. They decided not to cancel when they found out the pandas weren't here. But anyway, they were literally coming to visit DC because of the pandas. So, you know what? Maybe the pandas can help the DC budget. But yeah, there's been this big battle in the council over cuts, tax hikes. Bowser was, against most of the tax hikes. Mendelson was trying to sort of stem some of the cuts to the budget by introducing these, I think it's about $500 million in different tax increases.
Right. And I think that the key one, I mean, the one that sort of seems most freighted to me is this property tax for homeowners. It is limited to people who have houses of $2.5 million or more, which in DC is actually a pretty sizable number of houses given what real estate costs around here. It seems to me that for 20, 30 years, the basic economic program of the city has been, through a bunch of different ways, try to make Washington a more attractive place for people with money and don't engage in the kind of little harassments of them or things they perceive as harassment, like having to pay taxes, make amenities that they like, improve schools, since that remains a major factor for everybody. And whatever you think of the strategy from a kind of moral point of view, it has led to decades of better budgets for DC and more money to spend on equity programs. Now, because of the end of the COVID money, the troubles in downtown, and a bunch of factors like that, there isn't enough money to pay for the kind of equity programs that the city wants. And that's some of those have grown in recent years. So do we effectively tax very rich people to do that? The council says yes, and the mayor says no.
And I don't think we should be raising property taxes, period. Not residential property taxes, not commercial property taxes, not changing the homestead deduction or any other kind of gimmick to get more money out of people for their property.
But I think that's really the core of it. The what kind of burden are we willing to throw on people who can afford it in order to keep programs like this? One of the programs she had cut was a so-called equity program for childcare workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a political standpoint, making the burden be on people who own more expensive houses is certainly easier to swallow than a more broadly spread tax hike. But there have been a few of these recently that had the same sort of trade-off of, making people who can afford it pay a little bit more to cover programs that help out everyone else.
And I think the tricky thing is one of the things we saw in the pandemic, look, there'd been a period of 20, 30 years of actual population growth in DC after years of Washington and all other big cities losing people. The question is, how much is that growth a function of stuff Washington has done to make itself more attractive, and how much of it is just sort of a part of a national trend that won't change? And I think one of the things I personally perceived from the pandemic is that a lot of these things that we thought were sort of secular changes are a lot more vulnerable to events than we had assumed. What people started leaving during the pandemic, maybe for short terms, maybe for longer terms, we're not quite sure yet. Members of the council are also looking at undoing her cancellation of the Connecticut Avenue bike lanes, among other cuts.
There was a bunch of environmental stuff that was fought over in this budget as well that's continuing to be fought over, which I think is interesting.
What kind of stuff are you watching?
There was an interesting fight about solar and the renewable energy portfolio, and it's a little bit in the weeds. Basically, DC has a renewable energy portfolio, which means that there's a law that says, X amount of energy and that's purchased in the district of electricity has to come from renewable sources, and it gets higher every year. And there's a specific carve out for local solar power. And what that does is it creates a market for, if you put solar panels on your house, then you can sell the credits. They're called SRECs. You can sell those. And this energy portfolio creates a market for that. Anyway, Bowser's initial budget said, actually, DC is not going to buy clean energy according to the renewable energy portfolio. We're not going to do that, even though, we've made all these climate commitments. Instead, we're going to pay this alternative compliance, basically penalty for not doing it. That would actually be more money than buying clean energy. It's about $40 million. But then kind of the trick is she was going to take that $40 million, the penalty gets paid to the DC government, and she was going to, put that in the general fund basically and use that for paying for other stuff. It was kind of a sneaky, if you want to say, way of getting a little bit more money into the budget. And environmental groups were really worried that this would have a major impact on solar in the district. DC purchases about 5 to 10% of the solar credits. So it would have been kind of a big hit to that market and make it less attractive, basically, for you to put solar panels on your house or any other kind of solar development.
But again, it gets to the sort of nub of the issue, which is that, say there's $40 million, you could either spend it on renewable energy or spend it on making daycare workers whole. And there is a choice that's got to be made.
Yeah.
And I'm happy not to be an elected official. I don't have to make it. As a city, in the years of very good budgets, it's a choice that people didn't have to actually face. Like, we didn't have to choose between X or Y because we could do both of them. And in the current environment, it kind of like reveals a lot of that.
The disposable bag tax you have to pay if you get a plastic or paper bag at a grocery store. That money was all supposed to go to this Anacostia River cleanup fund. People have been on the boat tours they do on the river, or been to Kingman Island. They have a rangers program that helps keep the island looking good. There's trash collection. There's all these, environmental programs around the Anacostia River that are paid for by this fund that you pay when you get a plastic or paper bag. The mayor's budget, would have taken all that money and spent it on other stuff. So defunding all those programs, basically. I mean, again, it's a trade-off in a difficult budget, but that's a lot of, programs that have been really good for the city that would have disappeared. That was restored by the council in the vote this week.
So, Jacob, as folks know, you are on a mission for CityCast where you're visiting every single park in the District of Columbia. And park is a term whose legal definition in DC is really weird because it also includes a bunch of random triangles and patches of concrete and lost pieces of land that happen to be in the weird portfolio of the Park Service. So I expect you probably are less surprised than some people might be at the news that DC's park system has been voted for the third year in a row to be the best in the country.
Yeah, fourth year in a row.
Fourth year in a row.
Yeah.
Who makes this call and what do they base it on?
Yeah, so this is from the Trust for Public Land. I think for about a decade or maybe more, they've been doing this park score every year, and they unveil it and say that, basically rank all the biggest 100 cities in the country, rank their parks on, I think, 6 different metrics. And for the past few years, DC has come out number 1 by a sizable margin. And they're not saying qualitatively DC has the most beautiful parks, and they're not ranking it in that way, but in terms of how many people have access to a park near their home.
So from their point of view, an unimproved patch of grass or woods is just the same as a space that has, teeter-totters and manicured gardens?
Sort of. I mean, they do also rank amenities. So there's scores for dog parks, playgrounds, senior centers, stuff like that. But in terms of just there's also a score for acreage. Out of 100 points, DC has 100 points for the total percentage of the city's acreage that is parkland. It's about a quarter, 25%, which is amazing.
So it's a 25%. And that obviously includes Rock Creek Park, which is huge, and the mall, which is huge. You take those away, there's still quite a lot of parks in DC.
Yeah, I mean, there's some huge ones east of the Anacostia River, too, like Fort DuPont, Anacostia Park, Oxen Run. So there's some big parks along the stream valleys and along the rivers. So we have a lot of parks. A large percentage of the city is parks, but a lot of our parks are very small.
But is that bad? I mean, I'm pro small park. Like, I think if you have small parks, that means you can distribute them around neighborhoods.
It's great, except that a lot of the small parks are really unmaintained and unimproved, which like can be okay, but a lot of them are kind of like I've been to a bunch that basically like you can't even really safely get to as a pedestrian. Like it's next to a high-speed roadway. Maybe there's like one of those like metal curb things to keep cars from crashing. There's no like there's some of them you just cannot even really get to like if your dog wants to poop on it, you know. And then there's others that are little triangles that are just beautiful and have been really interestingly landscaped and have like green infrastructure. And I mean, there's just some really cool tiny parks that have been upgraded in neat ways. And then there's some that aren't really living up to their potential.
All right. So on that subject, you're, I don't know, a chunk of the way through your parks quest for us. Does CityCast need to take out insurance on you? Because if you're having to run across high-speed roadways to get to these places, are you all right, man?
I'm doing okay. I mean, I had a few mishaps. I fell off my bike and skinned my knee. That was dumb. I fell out of my kayak. I got caught in a storm.
Good God.
I got caught in a storm on the Potomac River. I had to sort of hide out at a DC Water like pier. So, you know, there's been some adventures, but I'm doing good.
How many have you visited?
It's around 60 right now.
And how many more to go?
Well, I'm a little bit ticked off with the Trust for Public Land because we're actually using their map because they have kind of, I think, the most complete map of all these parks. So we started with 683. They somehow came up with 14 more. So now it's 697 in their latest park
So you're not even 10% done.
I blame the Trust for Public Land.
What are you doing talking to me? Get out there.
I'm heading out soon. But yeah, it's been, you know, slower than I wanted. But I did a couple of visits to parks in Foggy Bottom where there are a lot of parks, small parks close together. And I was like, all right, I'm going to see how quickly I can visit them. And my goal was to kind of get it under 10 minutes a park, including transit between them. And I can't remember, it was like 8.5 minutes per park, including, you know, traveling between them, including documenting each one. So, you know, the ones that are close together and small, I think I can go pretty quickly between them.
Jacob, I wish you luck out there.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, before we end today's show, we have an exciting announcement. There's a new narrative series from our colleagues at CityCast Denver. It's called Lauren Boebert Can't Lose. Over the next month, leading up to her make or break primary in June, we'll be releasing episodes on a dedicated feed. Find it everywhere you get your podcasts every Wednesday. There's 2 out already. Through original reporting, speaking with friends, rivals, supporters, detractors, and even Boebert herself, the series explores the meteoric rise of the controversial Congresswoman, her most scandalous moments, how she exploded onto the scene with attention-grabbing antics, and her fascinating and troubling place in our political culture. Check it out if you're a fan of CityCast. We're even dropping an episode about her background running a gun-themed restaurant in a town literally called Rifle. It will be in our feed tomorrow. And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our interim executive producers are Julia Karen and Kayla Cote-Stemmerman. Kayla also writes our super informative and fun newsletter, Hey DC. Our interim producer is Ash Durbin, and our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.